Few countries in the world have a history as recent and at the same time as marked by tragedy as South Sudan. Since its independence in 2011, this young country has become a symbol of everything that defies logic. A land rich in natural resources, but devastated by extreme poverty, incessant violence, and instability that seems to have no end. How did such a young country become the scene of so much chaos in such a short space of time? What dark secrets lie buried within its borders, and why does its fight for a better future seem like a battle against the impossible? Get ready, because today Bello Mundo will make shocking and disturbing revelations about South Sudan that go far beyond what you might imagine. You're about to learn a side of the story that few dare to tell. Number 1. Location and geography. South Sudan is one of the youngest countries in the world and lies in the heart of Northeast Africa. Surrounded by 6 major neighbors, it shares borders with Sudan to the north, Ethiopia to the east, Kenya and Uganda to the southeast, the Democratic Republic of Congo to the south, and the Central African Republic to the west. With more than 619,000 square kilometers, the territory is a veritable geographical mosaic. From endless plains and golden savannas to gigantic swamps, the landscape is shaped by the impressive Sud, one of the largest wetlands on the planet. This incredible ecosystem is fed by the White Nile River, which cuts through the country like a vital artery, sustaining agriculture, transportation, and impressive biodiversity. Speaking of biodiversity, get ready for a scene worthy of a National Geographic documentary. The country is home to one of the largest migrations of antelopes in the world. Every year, millions of these animals cross the vast plains, creating an eye-popping natural spectacle. It is so great that it has been compared to the famous Serengeti migration, where wildebeest and zebras travel for miles between Kenya and Tanzania. When it comes to climate, South Sudan is equally diverse. The climate is divided into 2 main seasons: the rainy season, from April to October, when the vegetation grows and the fields turn green, and the dry season from November to March, when intense heat and arid areas dominate the scene. These changes directly affect agriculture and daily activities, requiring the population to constantly adapt. Number 2. Water wealth. Still on the subject of the nation's geography, when you think of a country, you might not imagine that a river can dictate the rhythm of local life. In South Sudan, the White Nile does just that. For those who don't know, the White Nile is one of the main tributaries of the famous River Nile. Yes, the one in Egypt that sustained one of the oldest and greatest civilizations in history. On this piece of land, it decides where people can live, how they live, and even what they eat. Sound like an exaggeration? It's not. In the rainy season, the White Nile overflows, swallowing up land, driving families from their homes, and turning everyday life into a race against the waters. When the dry season arrives, the opposite happens. Extreme heat and lack of rain make access to water a desperate challenge. This constant cycle of extremes turns life around the river into a daily battle. Fishermen depend on shoals that can disappear at a moment's notice. Farmers have to adjust their crops as quickly as the water level rises or falls. Cattle farmers walk for kilometers to find pasture for their herds. Number 3. Ethnic and cultural diversity. If South Sudan's geography is impressive enough, its cultural diversity is a chapter in itself. The country is home to dozens of ethnic groups, such as the Dinka, Nuer, and Shilluk, each with traditions so unique that it's hard not to be fascinated. Some are masters of cattle breeding, others excel at fishing, while there are those known for their artistic skills, carving wood, or creating musical instruments. Among them all, the Dinka stand out as the most numerous tribe and undoubtedly one of the most intriguing. With around 3 million members, the Dinka's life revolves around cattle, which are much more than a source of food. They believe that the number of cattle reflects status, social role, and even spirituality. But that's not all that's striking. In Dinka culture, the value of a bride is measured in cows. Brothers inherit the widows of their deceased siblings, and the use of cow urine and dung in skincare is an essential ritual. That's right, cow pee is considered an indispensable beauty secret. Now add to this the belief that in order to restore spiritual balance, a sacrifice must take place. And about this, we have a video here on the channel that tells you in detail about this tribe, the blood rituals, and the bizarre ritual of bathing in cow pee and using dung as a kind of skin moisturizer. So after that, be sure to check out the video, Inside Africa's Most Mysterious Community, the Obscured Secrets of Dinka Women's Lives. Number 4. Cattle are not just cattle. While for many people cattle are just farm animals, a source of meat or milk, in South Sudan cows, oxen, and bulls have a much deeper meaning. In some communities, the number of animals an individual owns defines their position, their prestige, and even their future possibilities. Want to get married? You'll need cows. Want to secure alliances with other families? Trade cattle. Want to show that you are respected in your ethnic group? Cattle say a lot about you. It's not uncommon to hear stories of families who breed, trade, and care for these animals with a zeal that goes beyond their economic value. And it's not just about power or status. Cattle are also connected to rites of passage, religious celebrations, funeral ceremonies, and peace agreements. When there are conflicts between groups, cattle can become currency to seal treaties or compensate for losses. In a scenario of few material resources, having or not having cattle makes the difference between being able to negotiate an advantageous marriage or seeing your lineage weakened. Number 5. Religion, language, culture. And obviously a diverse place with diverse groups, diverse languages too. Although English is the official language, South Sudan has more than 60 local languages. Yes, you heard right, more than 60. This means that in addition to hello, you can venture into greetings as diverse as the country's tribes. When it comes to religion, the mix is as impressive as the languages. Christianity is predominant, but it often merges with traditional beliefs that remain deeply rooted. Here, each group brings its own way of seeing the world. An example of this can be found in the stories told by the elders, such as the legend of Nikang, a cultural hero revered by the Shilluk, who believe that he has become the guardian spirit of his people. Or the narratives of the Dinka, who talk about cattle as a divine gift and a symbol of the link between humans and the spirit world. And the culture? That's full of life. Drums mark out rhythms. Among the Nuer, it is common to see men and women gathering in large circles for the Jing, a dance that celebrates the arrival of rain and the fertility of the soil. The Azande, meanwhile, perform dance rituals around giant drums, used to scare away evil spirits and attract good energy for the harvest. Let's not pretend it's all partying. You can't talk about this nation without mentioning the difficulties its people face. Number 6. History of the world's newest country. South Sudan is literally the youngest on the world map. It only became independent in 2011. This separation, however, was not a gift. It was the result of decades of conflict, neglect, and tensions that split the former Sudan in half. Unlike certain African countries such as Burundi whose borders were shaped by the joint interference of Germans and Belgians, Sudan's territory was administered by a partnership between the United Kingdom and Egypt, called the Anglo-Egyptian Condominium. Despite the pompous name, in practice the British were calling the shots. But here's the problem. North and South Sudan were treated as if they were two different worlds. The North, with its strong Arab and Muslim influence, received investment, schools, and infrastructure. The South, inhabited by people with their own cultures, was left isolated and unattended. This created a huge divide between the regions, which would later become the trigger and basis for one of Africa's bloodiest stories. Number 7. Independence. When Sudan gained its independence in 1956, the problems didn't go away. The central government, controlled by the North, continued to ignore the South, which began to resent this exclusion. This discontent led to the First Sudanese Civil War, which began even before independence in 1955 and only ended in 1972. This first conflict brought to the fore the struggle of the South against oppression and marginalization, resulting in the Addis Ababa Agreement, which granted limited autonomy to the region. However, the peace was short-lived. In 1983, the imposition of Islamic law throughout the country, including the Christian-majority South, which adhered to traditional beliefs, reignited tensions. The discovery of oil in the South further intensified the conflicts, resulting in the Second Sudanese Civil War, which lasted until 2005. This war was even more devastating, leaving millions dead and displaced, while the population suffered from poverty and the absence of basic rights. The end of this dark period came with the General Peace Agreement, brokered by international powers, which determined a 6-year transition period and the holding of a referendum to decide the future of the South. In 2011, the population voted overwhelmingly for separation, and on July 9th of the same year, South Sudan officially became independent. Independence brought freedom, but also enormous challenges. The country was born bearing the scars of decades of war, internal divisions, and an almost non-existent infrastructure. And although independence was a historic achievement, the struggle for stability and prosperity remains this young nation's greatest challenge. Number 8. Extreme poverty. Despite its rich soil, the reality for the majority of South Sudan's population is different. Deep poverty and a daily struggle to survive. With around 12 million inhabitants, more than 80% live in rural areas where planting and raising livestock are not just activities. They are the only chance of putting food on the table. And the figures leave no doubt. According to the World Bank, 82% of the population survives on less than $1.90 a day. But that's not all. More than 60% of people face chronic hunger, a scenario fueled by conflicts, climate change, and the pandemic, which have only worsened what was already a gigantic problem. Now, imagine living in a place where, as well as planting, you have to hope that the rainy season doesn't flood everything or that the drought doesn't wipe out your crops. Sounds harsh, doesn't it? And yet, the natural resources that could change this reality, such as oil and minerals, are in the hands of a few. Corruption and a lack of infrastructure mean that the majority only see the crumbs of this wealth. It's a vicious circle. Poverty feeds the lack of opportunities, and the lack of opportunities keeps the country stuck. But what really exposes this inequality is something much more basic: access to clean water, sanitation, and medical care. Number 9. Water, sanitation, and health. If living on so little is hard enough, imagine not having clean water or a toilet at home. For half the population, this is the reality. Around 90% have no access to basic sanitation, and this opens the way to diseases that, with a little hygiene, would be preventable. And it doesn't stop there. Without enough health centers, any simple problem can become a serious threat. Lack of hygiene, combined with malnutrition and the collapse of the health system, means that preventable diseases take lives and leave entire families destitute. But do you think the government invests heavily in health? Far from it. Only 2.6% of the budget goes to this area. The result? Organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières end up being the only option for millions of people. They bring vaccines and treatments to those living in the most remote regions, but the effort is like wiping ice. With no drinking water, no toilets, and a broken health system, the population lives in a triangle of difficulties. And meanwhile, solutions always seem far from reach. Number 10. Education. The education situation is another alarming indicator of the level of poverty and state abandonment. More than 70% of children are out of school, and the reason is as simple as it is cruel. For many families, surviving day to day is more urgent than studying. Between helping in the fields, looking after livestock, or taking on household chores, learning ends up taking a back seat. And if the situation is difficult for all children, it's even worse for girls. Cultural norms that prioritize child marriage and domestic work keep them out of the classroom before they even have a chance to start. But it doesn't stop there. The journey to school, or even to basic activities, is a constant risk. Many girls face threats such as harassment, assault, and sexual violence when fetching water, food, or even using community toilets. In conflict zones, the violence gets worse, including kidnappings and murders that destroy lives and entire communities. And the result of this scenario, everyone already knows, right? Without access to education, the cycle of poverty only perpetuates itself, depriving entire generations of opportunities that could change their lives. Number 11. The future. Despite so many challenges, all is not lost. Did you know that life expectancy in South Sudan, which 20 years ago was only 48 years, has now risen to 57? It may not seem like much compared to the rest of the world, but it shows that some initiatives are making a difference. Much of this progress comes from the work of NGOs and international organizations. They bring vaccines, medical treatment, and essential care to communities that, without this help, would be completely helpless. But is that enough? How do we turn these small steps into changes that really last? Without serious investment in health, education, and infrastructure, these improvements end up being only palliative, and the future of millions of people continues to depend on answers that still seem a long way off. And so we end our journey through South Sudan. Did you already know all these details about the history, difficulties, and curiosities of this nation? What caught your attention the most? Let us know what you think in the comments. If you like exploring impactful stories and places that hide little-known realities, stick around. There's still a lot to discover together in this bello mundo. See you at the next destination.